Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. Today we have an incredible group of super social innovators that have been recognized by classy.org, and we are just thrilled to have an impressive group of people who are absolutely changing the world and saving lives. You won't want to miss this discussion.
Welcome to Your Mark on the World, bringing you another change maker with champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
Well, hello, everyone. We're excited to have you here. Thank you very much for joining me. Let me just give a quick roll call introduction of all the people who are here. Wave as I call your name, but we have from Humanitarian Open Street Team, Rebecca Firth. From Mission Asset Fund, Jose Quinones. From Days for Girls, Celeste Mergens. From Sustainable Health Enterprises, we have Elizabeth Sharp. From Because International, we have Kenton Lee. From Habitat for Humanity, we have Jyoti Patel. And from International Justice Mission, Blair Burns. From Grassroots Soccer, we have Molly McHugh. And from Samasource, we have Wendy Gonzalez. From Open Biome, we have James Burgess. And from Classy, we have Pat Walsh. Welcome, all of you, to the show. We're thrilled to have you. Now, I'm excited for this discussion. I want to start off by setting some groundwork. I want people to understand the importance of what you're doing. And so I'm going to ask you all to explain what it is that would happen if you weren't doing what you're doing to solve a problem. So let's start with Rebecca. Rebecca, at Humanitarian Open Street Team, what would happen in the world if you weren't doing what you're doing?
Perfect. Thanks very much, Devin, and thank you for hosting us today. So at Humanitarian Open Street Map, we create maps of places in the world that are vulnerable to disasters, disease outbreaks, things like that. So if we weren't creating these maps, then governments, humanitarian actors who are working in these places to address these problems wouldn't have the data that they need to do that. That data could be understanding logistics, understanding the population of an area, for example. So essentially, without the work that we do, these organizations just don't have what they need to be able to address the needs of a population. Particularly, for example, infectious diseases are something we work a lot with, mapping to find the sources of cholera outbreaks, Ebola outbreaks, and other infectious diseases.
Fantastic. Have you ever done any work with polio folks?
Yeah, there's several mapping projects which relate to polio. Infectious diseases are really a huge amount of the work that we do, because obviously normally when someone comes in, for example, to a health center with an infectious disease, if you can't find where they live and you can't test their family, their neighbors, increase your programs in that area, whether that be distributing drugs all the way through to education programs to use malaria bed nets, then it's incredibly difficult to stop that disease from spreading. So, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Jose, what would happen if you weren't doing what you're doing?
Well, thank you again for hosting us and having this discussion. We work with low-income immigrant families to try to develop their financial security. And our signature program is called Lending Circles. It's based on a very traditional, age-old practice of people coming together and lending and saving money with one another. What we have done is basically found a way to formalize this activity that's already happening, in our communities, but formalize it in such a way that the credit bureaus and the formal financial systems can actually recognize it. So through this activity, we're helping people build and improve their credit scores and thereby their financial security overall. I mean, if we weren't doing this work, and I think more people would be left in the shadows of our economy, more people would not see their full economic potential realized, and more people would not be able to access the most basic financial products out there, and we would all be diminished because of that. Because people would just not be able to, again, buy that house or start that business or invest in themselves and in education. And I think as a society overall, we would be worse off by allowing more and more people to like not come to full flourishing of their economic potential. So I think that is exactly what we're trying to avoid.
Great. Appreciate that. Now, Celeste, what is the problem? What would happen if you weren't doing what you're doing?
So Days for Girls helps women and girls all over the world go to school and go to work by having access to feminine hygiene they can count on month after month. We're unique in that we do that in answer to whatever the solution is that works for them. And part of what we do is washable or cups or whatever works for them. And importantly, to couple that with education for women's health.
Right, but Celeste, what happened? The question is, what do you do?
I got
the problem.
So the difference for us is that we knew we had to make that a sustainable thing. So Days for Girls has done that in ways that are reaching far corners of the earth. We've reached 101 nations on 6 continents. And so we feel what would have happened is we wouldn't have as big of a global dialogue. Menstrual hygiene wouldn't have as much awareness. And importantly, that health education wouldn't necessarily be reaching the very last mile by virtue of this social venture.
Yeah. Okay. Elizabeth, you're kind of playing in the same field. Tell us about the problem. What would happen if you and Celeste and people like you weren't doing what you're doing?
Well, to piggyback on what Celeste was talking about, we also in our signature program address, it's called She 28, and we address menstrual hygiene. If we were not involved, frankly, girls and women would be using alternative things that are not necessarily the most healthy things, like rags and in extreme circumstances, dried leaves. And this would cause health problems down the line for girls and women. It's not reliable, and so they would miss school. And I think most importantly, there's a loss of dignity there.
Well, as I've researched this topic and in talking to Celeste in the past, it's easy to find women who are being sexually exploited as well. People who either feel forced or are either being essentially raped or forced into prostitution over this issue. Are you seeing that as well, Elizabeth?
Well, I think when you don't have your own agency, and agency can be money, it can be social capital in your community, then you are unfortunately end up being a victim of a lot of terrible things like the examples that you just gave. So we have seen that.
It's tragic, and so it really is a huge problem. Now, Kenton, what's going on out there? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? I want to caution you. Don't tell us what you're doing. Say that. That's the punchline, right?
Yeah.
Tell us the problem. What's the problem out there that you see?
So the problem that I personally saw when I lived in Kenya, and now it's the work that I do every day, was for kids who don't have shoes, or they have shoes, but they're kids, right? They outgrow them. So for kids who don't have the ability to have shoes all the time, shoes are a big deal. I didn't know that about 10 years ago when I had my first international trip. I didn't know that. And I began to see firsthand and then learn a lot more about what happens when kids don't have shoes. And there's 3 big things. It's a lot of health issues, especially if they live in areas where there's a lack of adequate sanitation. So it's a lot of health issues. Education. Often shoes are a mandatory part of a required school uniform. And without shoes, kids can't go to school. And then it's just the dignity and self-confidence that comes by having a pair of shoes and a pair of shoes that fit.
It's a huge problem, and it'll be interesting to learn what you're doing to address that. Now, Jody, what is the problem that you see? Again, I want to not focus on what you're doing yet. We're going to come to that, but tell us about the problem you see.
Yes, about 1 in 5 people, or 1.6 billion people across the globe lack adequate housing. And affordable mortgage is, most of the low-income families are excluded from the formal mortgage markets, and many institutions simply do not serve these low-income families that need support towards housing and affordable housing at that. And this is where Habitat for Humanity has tried and worked and tried to fill the gap. I won't talk about the fund.
Yeah. So is there a financing problem as well? Is that part of the mix for reasons that people don't have housing?
Indeed, because when you look at people across the globe, they live in makeshift shelters, and although they have very informal source of income and are able to have adequate shelter, they simply just don't have the kind of credit one sees in the formal markets to be able to go to a financial institution and ask for support in terms of finance. And most people also build incrementally. They build as and when their cash flows allow them. So that makes it very critical for organizations like Habitat for Humanity to step in and fill that.
Wow. Well, thank you, Jody. Blair, what is the problem you see at International Justice Mission?
So at IJM, we won the Class C award for our work to fight cybersex trafficking of children in the Philippines, which we do in partnership with the government of the Philippines, Western law enforcement governments, and NGOs. And what that is a new and growing form of slavery that involves a person, usually in the West, logging in onto a computer and then live directing the abuse of a child in the Philippines, a poor child who's taken off the street and abused for a small amount of money.
Just tragic. It's beyond heinous to imagine the depravity of people who are involved in either end of that tragic situation. I'm glad you're there to address it, and we're look forward to learning more about what you're doing. Molly, tell us about the problem that you see from grassroots soccer. Again, let's focus on the problem that you see.
Sure. Thank you, Devin, for this opportunity. So currently, we have the largest generation of adolescents and young people in human history, 1.8 billion young people on the planet. Yet these adolescents are being left behind when it comes to health, especially in developing countries. For example, in the last decade, HIV-related deaths have decreased for every age group except adolescents. So the problem that we see is a gap between what adolescents need to take control of their health and access health services and stay on health services, and them getting it and having a safe space to do all of those things. So at Grassroots Soccer, we are trying to close the adolescent health gap in developing countries.
Why does the gap exist? Is it because the health services aren't available for them, or they're not taking advantage of it?
It's a great question. It's actually a combination of both. There's been a lot of global emphasis on child mortality, which has been a huge win for global health. I mean, it's a great success story. Still a lot of work to go. But adolescents are a group where services aren't necessarily tailored to their needs. It's such a tricky time in their development. And there are a lot of tricky issues, especially around sexual and reproductive health, that they may not feel comfortable going to a traditional health system. So we're trying to bridge that gap.
I can't imagine why a teenager wouldn't want to talk to his parents about sex.
Right?
It turns out I wasn't the only one. Wendy, what is the problem you see from the vantage point of Somasource?
The problem that we see from the vantage point of Somasource is really poverty. We believe that poverty is ultimately at the root of all social ills, whether it be medicine, trafficking, education, and the ability to ultimately further contribute into society. So we're really trying to solve poverty. That's what our organization's about.
Oh, that's fantastic, Wendy. I'm glad you're there. And global poverty is in so many measurable ways declining, but there are still 700 million people living in extreme poverty, and billions more living in less extreme forms of poverty, right?
That's exactly right. And we are really trying to target those 700 million, really those that are truly sort of at the bottom of the economic pyramid, who have the biggest barrier towards getting gainful employment.
Yeah. There's been an ongoing debate for years about whether the people in that group need, what they need to get out of poverty, but some have argued that it's really pretty simple, that they need a job. So I look forward to learning more about what you're doing. James, there is no doubt in my mind that what you're doing is the most shocking thing of what people are doing. But tell us a little bit about the problem that you address, because I'm sure most people in the audience do not know this is a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So Open Biome is really focused on two problems. The sort of most immediate and direct problem that we're focused on is a bacterial infection called Clostridium difficile, or C. diff. Not everyone's heard of C. diff, but it's actually the most common hospital-acquired infection in the U.S. and is considered one of the CDC's 3 most urgent health threat priorities in the country. So it's actually a really significant problem. It affects about 500,000 patients every year in this country, and also has pretty significant effects overseas as well. C. diff is a tricky infection. It causes really severe diarrhea and can lead to complications that can require surgery or can even cause death. And in many cases, it doesn't respond to our standard of care antibiotic treatment. Now, what's really fortunate and exciting is actually there's another type of therapy that does treat C. diff really effectively. It's called a fecal transplant.
Wait, hold that thought. We'll come back to what you're doing.
Let's
focus on the problem for a minute. My father nearly died from a C. diff infection last year on the 4th of July. This is a big problem. Thousands of people die. How many people die every year from this, do you think?
In the U.S., it's about 30,000 people die every year, and so we can expect at least double that, worldwide. So a lot of people die, but a even much larger patient population is severely suffering. We actually launched the organization because a close friend of ours had C. diff and was unable to go on the subway because he wasn't sure if he'd be able to make it to a bathroom in time. These patients usually have to go to the bathroom 30 or 40 times a day. So it's a really debilitating, frankly embarrassing and terrible disease for people to have. What's exciting is this treatment called a fecal transplant works really well, but it's very hard to get. It's still the problem. I'm still in the problem here. Until we launched, in the old days at least, it was very hard to have a fecal transplant done. There's a lot of administrative and legal risk associated with it. Hospitals were not very excited about bringing this procedure in because of obviously all the sort of taboo and concern about bringing stool into a healthcare environment. And so that's sort of the really immediate problem that we're focused on is bridging that gap. The broader problem, though, or really opportunity is this really exciting new field of medicine that we're just starting to tiptoe into, called the microbiome, which is the collection of bacteria that live in your body and on your body. Almost 1 trillion bacteria that live in your body. And we're just starting to learn about how important the microbiome is for human health across a huge range of health conditions, including autoimmune disorders and metabolic disease and infectious disease. And the opportunity is, can we make this science move faster and help the scientific community really understand the importance of this brand new sort of almost organ system it's been defined as in healthcare. And so that's another kind of problem in and of itself, is how do we make this science evolve faster given all the exciting promise and potential of the microbiome? And we'll get to that too.
Fantastic. Now, Pat, you've assembled this incredible group of people and organizations who have identified these huge problems. How did you pick winners? What does the award recognize? Let's focus on what does the award that they've all won recognize?
Sure. The Classy Awards recognize some of the most innovative nonprofits and social enterprises from around the world. Our mission at Classy has always been to mobilize and empower the world for good. And we've been fortunate over the past few years to work with thousands of organizations. And one of the realizations that we had is that there's a lot of innovative thinking and a lot of innovative and creative models that are out there addressing social issues like the ones you just heard. But oftentimes those nonprofits, those social enterprises weren't receiving the recognition for their programs that they deserved. And so we created the Classy Awards to shine a spotlight on those programs. And our purpose through the Classy Awards is to recognize amazing organizations like these.
Well, fantastic. We're thrilled to have you all here, and again, congratulate you on receiving your awards. I want to go through the group again, and in order to, I think, help the audience maintain some continuity, I'll go through in the same order and ask you all to tell us what you're doing to address the problem we discussed in the first question. So, Rebecca, tell us about what Humanitarian Open Street team is doing to solve the problem of the lack of maps in the world.
Great. Okay. Yeah, so as I mentioned first time, maps and geodata are a huge barrier to running development projects or disaster responses. And what we do is we help anyone, anywhere in the world create those maps. So we've made a really simple, easy online tool which you can pick up in, up to 5 minutes, and you can directly contribute to creating those maps. So it's a really incredible project because we sort of harness the crowd to support genuine field work. So this week we passed 30,000 volunteers who've mapped the homes of over 45 million people who haven't been on the map before. And all those people can now receive, be the beneficiaries of development projects in a way that they just couldn't before. So one example of this is last year when there was a yellow fever outbreak in Kinshasa. The Missing Maps community, so our community of mappers who are using the OpenStreetMap tools, activated to map the area. And then what followed was the largest and fastest vaccination campaign ever by Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, who used the map to vaccinate 720,000 people in 10 days. Wow. So without that map, that project, it's not just that the project can happen, but it will happen slowly. It's that the project can't happen at all. So what we do is we just help anyone in the world contribute to humanitarian fieldwork.
That's incredible work. Thank you for doing it. Now, Jose, tell us what you're doing at the Mission Asset Fund.
Yes, thank you for that. What we're doing is basically addressing the question of people that are financially excluded. We've learned that in the United States alone, there's about 45 million adults that are what are called credit invisible, that have no credit score or no credit report. And that might seem like, oh, well, so what if they don't have a credit score, right? But the fact is, in this, in this country, in this economy, without having a credit report or credit score, it basically means that you're just invisible to the economic system overall. And it's sort of like very debilitating. I mean, because without that credit score, you can't get a loan to buy a car, to buy a house, to invest in your business. So without even a credit report, it's very difficult for people to actually even get, life insurance or insurance of any type, because everything kind of goes back to the credit report. It's sort of like the passport that we all use. And without the passport, you can't really, do anything. You can't travel abroad. You can't really navigate yourself, around the world. So we're trying to sort of address that. And now that's not a problem of just the United States. I mean, there's over 2 billion people around the world that are considered, financially excluded. People that don't have checking accounts, savings accounts, people that are just really outside of the financial mainstream on the worldwide level. What we're trying to do is to say, well, yes, we want to bring them in, right? Because that's going to not only strengthen them as individuals, as a family, as a community, to sort of develop their financial wherewithal, but it also will improve the economic systems overall. But it's not just about like, oh, here's a checking account, here's a saving account, and then that's that, right? Or here's a mobile phone and we're done with that. No, I mean, the fact is that there's a lot of great things that people are doing outside of the system. And so we're trying to recognize that as well, to say that they're not just, helpless individuals, out there in the hinterlands, doing nothing. They actually are doing something. And so we're trying to recognize the good things that are happening in the community and then using that as a starting point to get them into the system. And so when we develop lending circles, we sort of recognize this age-old practice of people coming together to lend and borrow money with each other. In Mexico, the portandas, cundinas, all throughout the Caribbean, they're called susus. I mean, this is it's a common practice all over the world, but it's invisible, it's informal, nobody recognizes it.
And so by formalizing it, you're able to give people a credit score and give them a leg up onto the sort of the formal economic system, right?
Exactly. I mean, we're basically, it's about formalizing informality. That is essentially our strategy, about formalizing what's already happening, in people's lives, and then that's a starting point to kind of get it more and more integrated into our overall economic systems.
Great. Now, Celeste, at Days for Girls, you started a little bit telling us already what you're doing. Tell us more about what you're doing to provide young women and women around the world with pads.
Absolutely. So the real obstacle for these women is being able to take advantage of every day of their lives, and also that understanding of their health, right? We combine those things so that she helping break the stigma and the shame by empowering local ambassadors of women's health and ambassadors all over the world, more than 60,000 of them, to teach the people in their community that there is no shame. Without periods, there would be no people. That real stigma and real shame that women are facing that limit their opportunities can be overcome by a community dialogue. So we're giving her or him that power while enabling them to follow this passion by having income from doing direct sales of a product that is small enough to fit in your hand and lasts 2 to 3 years. And engaging these two things together is a powerful means of shifting the stigma that's out there while giving them back days of dignity.
Now, Elizabeth, you're doing some of the same work, and Celeste actually introduced me to this problem last year, and I've been really focused on it. I visited Rwanda and Uganda earlier this year. I visited Banapads there in Uganda, doing similar work. Do you tell us about your approach and how that differs from Celeste's and how it's working?
Sure. So we help women jumpstart businesses to manufacture and distribute affordable maxi pads. And the reason we do this is many years ago, when I was researching the problem, I found out that people were donating pads, and that didn't offer necessarily a long-lasting solution in a lot of communities. So I put my business skills to the test and figured out how to use local material, like I have some here, some banana fiber from the trunk of the tree, and a simple manufacturing process using very little electricity and water so that women can make their own pads and then eventually sell it on the market to schools and other places where women and girls gather. And we couple those that manufacturing and distribution business with health education so that women and girls can go to school, work, be confident in work, and have the dignity that they need every day.
Yeah, it's impressive work that you're doing, and really a global problem that I don't know when people really started talking about it, but it's a relatively recent discovery, right? Most people didn't recognize, even in the development community, that this was the problem that it is, and I'm so glad you and Celeste and others are jumping in to address it.
Well, that's actually a great point. The reason why I jumped into this in the first place is because it fell through the cracks of traditional development. It wasn't at the top of the list for health. The health people at big foundations wasn't at the top of the list for education folks. And I'm curious with my colleagues on the call as well, if that's part of the reason why they are doing what they're doing. Was this overlooked by a lot of different big actors? And is that why you jumped in and decided to do something about it?
Sure seems to be the case with James at Open Biome. I suspect it probably is true to a greater or lesser extent with everybody. Now, Kenton, tell us about your shoes. Now, there's a viral video out there that I keep seeing because I love this space, and I keep seeing your famous shoes out there. You're going to have an entourage soon if this video gets any more popular. But tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, so this came from an idea I had when I lived at an orphanage about 10 years ago. There were a lot of kids who had donated shoes, which are great. A lot of groups work to help kids get shoes, but they'd outgrown them and they didn't have any other options. There were no more donations, and the orphanage was very poor and couldn't afford new shoes every time the kids' feet grow, which kids' feet are growing a lot. And so I just had an idea. What if there was a shoe that could grow? And so we created a very simple name, The Shoe That Grows. It's a shoe that grows 5 sizes, can last up to 5 years, and really just saw it as an innovation, like just a little better way to do it. It doesn't solve every problem for the kids. The reason they can't have shoes in the first place is because of the challenges of extreme poverty, but for that specific problem, for kids without shoes, this has been an incredible shoe that, as their feet grow, it grows right along with their feet. So, and for us, like, legitimately, I did not expect to ever win a Classy Award or even be in this space. I just had the idea. I live in Idaho. I'm really just a simple guy. It took me 6 years to kind of work on it. And then, like you said, 2 years ago, we went viral. And so we're really proud. In the last 2 years, we've gotten over 100,000 pairs of shoes to kids in 89 countries. And now we're starting to manufacture them in some of the places where they're being used the most. So our hope is to not only get these great shoes to kids who need them, but also to bring jobs through the manufacturing, warehousing, and distribution of the shoes as well.
So your model generally is to have organizations buy the shoes and distribute them, so the children generally are getting the shoes for free. Is that right?
Right now, we are in kind of a donation model. So we have worked with over 1,000 different churches, organizations, Rotary clubs, schools. People who travel and work with kids are taking the shoes with them for the most part and hand delivering those to the kids they work with. But as we continue to grow, our team is really only just a couple years old. As we continue to grow, as we continue to produce the shoes locally, we're excited to look into retail opportunities for the shoes, more kind of localized, regionalized distribution. We just really feel strongly about getting a pair of shoes to every kid who needs it. And in many cases, families can take care of their own kids and get them shoes, but for those kids who truly cannot afford shoes, especially as their feet grow, we just don't want to accept that as reality. We want to get a pair of shoes to every kid who needs it.
That's great. Now, Jody, let's talk a little bit about what's going on at Habitat. What are you doing to address these problems, especially the financing problem for people in getting into, legitimate housing?
Yes, thanks, Devin. So when you look at the movement of microfinance that allowed people to borrow small loans because they did not have access to formal banking system, people took loans and they used it towards working capital to create products and services and goods working out of their homes. What has happened is that when people have a leaking roof or a need to install a water tank in their homes, they often have to borrow money towards that purpose, but that's not really allowing them to use money towards productive uses. It's creating an asset within your home. What the studies had found is that people often used these short-term borrowing and used it towards long-term purposes, creating a severe cash flow mismatch at household levels. So in order to demonstrate the scale opportunity and the financial viability of housing microfinance as a product, what Habitat for Humanity did was to launch the Microbuild Fund. It is a $100 million fund, a closed-end fund for 10-year period that has an evidence of strong support and partnership from Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which is the U.S. Agency, and it is a part of the U.S. government. And other actors such as MetLife Foundation and Omidyar Network, those foundations have vested interest in making sure that people have access towards property rights and proper titles. So what Microbill Fund does is provide longer term, larger size capital to institutions, which in turn on lends to borrowing clients. What also Habitat does is provide almost $10 million of technical assistance support, which means building the capacity of institutions so that they can create these kind of housing microfinance products. We also train the banking institutions, loan officers and managers. And on the borrowing side, what we do is provide technical assistance to the clients that take these loans so that we ensure that they are able to build sustainably, strongly, and create durable homes. And also provide them with financial education. So when you look at the demonstration effect of a fund like Microbill, which has created this platform of public-private partnership, what you see is that as of today, which is we are halfway into the fund's life, at 5-year mark, the fund has almost disbursed 3/4 of its 100 million, totaling about 75 million across 43 microfinance institutions in 26 countries. And what we have seen is that when you have a properly developed product, a finance product, then people will have an incentive to repay those loans back. And we see that evidence in the fund itself as of this point. Yeah.
Remarkable work, remarkable work. Now, Blair, at International Justice Mission, we talked about one of the most offensive problems that exists in the world. What are you doing to address that?
Yeah, at IJM, we have a pretty fundamental belief that if a justice system is functioning, at least on some basic level, then violence against the poor will dramatically go down. And we believe the flip side of that as well, that if a justice system is not functioning, any intervention that you do to stop violence is not going to get very far. So why is that? Because if you think about human rights violations, just about every single one of them is illegal in just about every single country in the world. But the protection of the law requires a delivery system, and the delivery system for that protection is the justice system. That's the police, it's the prosecutors, it's the courts, and it's the social services. And so what we're trying to do is to go to places where the justice system is not functioning particularly well and figure out how to make it function. So we do that by conducting casework, meaning that we work with justice system partners, other NGOs, and in the case of cyber sex trafficking, international law enforcement, to bring individual cases of violence, rescue the victim of that violence, and initiate prosecution, hopefully achieve a conviction against the perpetrators. And we do that case after case for a long period of time. And what that allows us to do is to see what are the infirmities in the system, where can we target reforms within the system to make it work better. And then we believe that those reforms, once they take off and start to work better, then the system is functional and there'll be a dramatic impact on the crime. In the Philippines, prior to our cyber sex trafficking work, we were doing regular sex trafficking, and we saw over the course of about 10 years between a 75% and an 86% reduction in the crime over time. And we believe that is a result solely of the justice system starting to work. On cyber sex trafficking, we're just getting started, and so we're seeing a massive number of cases emanating from our Western law enforcement partners. We're all struggling to get a handle on cyber sex trafficking, but we believe the same prescription will work, that we will figure out where we can target reforms, and then eventually the justice system will provide a credible deterrent and people will stop committing this crime.
And you don't have to prevent every single case or capture every single bad guy. All you have to do is raise the cost of doing business, and the crooks will go do something else, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Blair, we commend you for the great work you're doing. Molly, let's talk about teenage sex a little bit. They make movies about this stuff. What are you doing to help address this really serious health crisis that really is rather unaddressed around the world?
So at Grassroots Soccer, we believe young people can be the greatest agents of change in this issue. And so what we do is we harness the global power of soccer, the beautiful game, to connect young people with the mentors, information, and health services they need to thrive, be empowered to make educated choices around these health challenges such as HIV, AIDS, sexual health, gender-based violence, and malaria. So what we do, our model is built on what we call the 3 C's, amplifying the 3 A's. The 3 C's are our formula for reaching young people. And the 3 C's are coaches, curriculum, and culture. Our coaches, to use soccer language, which we do throughout our programming, football, and many of the local places where we work. Our coaches are young individuals from the communities where we work. We train them in health education skills and on mentorship skills. They become supportive mentors to our participants. Our curricula are evidence-based, engaging, and culturally sensitive. So we have curricula that address various issues that might be relevant to that cultural context, whether it be gender-based violence, malaria in certain regions, HIV, AIDS, etc. And all of our curricula use soccer-based activities as the heart of what they do. So the learning is all engaging and interactive. And that leads into our culture, which is about being fun, engaging, and interactive in a way that young people can connect with, and also about creating safe and supportive spaces. Those 3 C's, the goal is to amplify impact in the 3 A's, which are assets, access, and adherence. So assets, to jump on a point that was made earlier about young people having agency, having the skills to negotiate in relationships, having the knowledge to base decisions and make good decisions about their behaviors. Access is what we touched on earlier about understanding where they can go for health services and helping to get them there and bridge that gap. And adherence is about setting them up for a lifetime of accessing those health services and also supporting them when things get scary. For example, one of our most successful programs in Zambia right now is a program specifically for HIV positive youth. That can be extremely scary to be diagnosed HIV positive. They are supported by an HIV positive coach, and they are surrounded by an HIV positive youth club to help them through this scary process and to show them that there's hope ahead of them. Okay. Well,
thank you, Molly. I appreciate it. Great work you're doing and all your alphabet activities. We are grateful for. Listen, I have done, not a shocking confession here, but I've done a poor job of managing time because I just love this discussion. Do you all have, say, 5 more minutes to keep going? Because we're now over our committed time. So we'll keep going we'll try and wrap this up quickly. But Wendy, tell us what you're doing at Somasource.
Sure. Thanks, Devin. So as I mentioned before, we're really trying to fight extreme poverty. And we do this by connecting marginalized women and youth, those that are most vulnerable and have the biggest challenges towards employment, to dignified work via the internet. And we do this through a digital skills training program where we work directly in slum areas. So for example, we work in the slums of Nairobi. We work in extremely poor rural Uganda. We also work in India as well. And after we provide these young people and women digital skills training, we then support them in terms of direct employment opportunities. So we either place them or work with local corporations to place them into full-time work, or we hire them directly. And the kind of work that we do is trainable work. So our goal is to really be the bridge employer, because we believe once somebody's able to get a job, they are able to stay employed and ultimately permanently move out of the poverty cycle. So it's been a really, really exciting model to date. We've moved over 36,000 people out of poverty, paid out over $10 million in wages, and we found that the folks that leave our program, well over 80% of them stay employed in full-time employment or go back to higher education, which is university.
It's really inspiring work that you do, and nothing like a job to help someone get out of poverty. James, tell us what you're doing. I've been waiting for this great discussion about fecal matter, so give it to us, James.
Sure, always happy to talk about poop. So what Open Biome does is we run a stool bank. So think of a blood bank. Think of, the Red Cross. We do that for poop. And so we in particular, make it easy for physicians to get access to very carefully, rigorously screened stool that's been processed and prepped and frozen and is ready for use in fecal transplant procedures.
What is a fecal transplant, and why on earth would anyone want one?
Yeah, great question. So a fecal transplant is where we're taking stool, and really what we're after actually is the bacteria that are inside of the stool from a healthy donor, and we actually transfuse it into the colon of a patient. So it can be administered in a variety of different ways. It's most commonly done through a colonoscopy, although more recently we've been rolling out an oral capsule formulation, so it's literally a poop pill that you can take. And what this is doing is delivering the healthy microbiome from a donor into the patient. And it's particularly exciting for C. difficile patients. It turns out about 90% of C. diff patients are cured by a fecal transplant procedure, which is a relatively low-cost, safe procedure, whereas many of these patients don't respond to our most powerful antibiotics. So it's a very exciting therapy for this patient population. And we also use a lot in research. And so more and more Open Biome is partnering with leading academic hospitals and research institutions to understand how the microbiome causes disease sort of beyond C. difficile. So looking at autoimmune disorders, diabetes, obesity, even neuropsychiatric conditions have microbiome links. And we work with scientists to do clinical trials where we're actually giving patients fecal transplants with these other diseases to see if we can actually, induce a clinical response and possibly lead to the development of new cures. So today, Open Biome provides about 1,000 fecal transplants a month to hospitals all across the U.S. and actually in Western Europe, and I think we're getting ready to do our first partnership with someone in South America. So we have a pretty large footprint and are really focused on making this treatment as widely available as possible.
That's great. Well, I can't imagine anything more or less appetizing than a poop pill, but what a radical advance in terms of cost to be able to administer that by taking a pill as opposed to having a surgical procedure to provide the transplant.
Exactly.
Exciting work, exciting work. Well, Pat, let's wrap up with you. Tell us how the winners were chosen quickly.
Sure. And I'll make this quick. I know we're short on time. But essentially, as many of the organizations here can attest to, we have a very comprehensive process for selecting the Class C award winners. It's a 4-phase process with a very comprehensive nomination form. And it's one that we've refined and continue to improve year after year with the Class C awards. What really makes the Class C awards prestigious, though, is the selection committee that actually determines who the winners are. At Class C, we're fortunate to have built the framework by which many of these organizations can be recognized, but the real prestige of the award comes from the esteemed leaders that are behind the actual selection process. We have some of the top experts and influencers in the nonprofit space, foundations, corporations, academia, international agencies, and it's their involvement and their perspective that actually lends to the credibility of the awards itself.
Fantastic. Now, one last question for you, Pat. When will you do this again, and how do people get or organizations get nominated?
Absolutely. So we'll be hosting the 8th annual Class C Awards in Boston next year, June 14th, 2018. We're really excited about that. Nominations will be open this fall. So you can stay tuned, classy.org, and you can actually sign up to get all the alerts when they come around.
Fantastic. Well, I cannot thank you all enough for taking the time to share your stories with me today. It's a thrill to have all the winners on one call. We appreciate you taking the time to do it, and I congratulate you one last time on your really tremendous and impressive recognition. The work you're doing, I'm sure feels like its own reward for most of you, but it's great to see you recognized for the great work you're doing. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Devin. Thank you.
All righty, let's do some.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see here.
Thank you for listening. This podcast was recorded via Google Hangouts on Air and is available at youtube.com/Devin Thorpe. Subscribe to this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes by searching for Your Mark on the World. Every weekday, Devin hosts a CEO, celebrity, entrepreneur, or other changemaker here on the Your Mark on the World show to inspire and prepare you to make your mark. Devin is a champion of social good, writing about, advocating for, and advising people who are doing good. He is a Forbes contributor who is a recognized thought leader in social entrepreneurship, impact investing, and crowdfunding. To book Devin as a speaker, visit devinthorpe.com. Learn more about Devin's work at yourmarkontheworld.com.